It started as just another quiet morning in London, the city humming along with the usual rhythm of traffic, tourists snapping pictures in front of Buckingham Palace, and politicians making their way to Westminster. But beneath this seemingly ordinary facade, a storm was brewing, one that threatened to shake the very foundation of the British monarchy and send shockwaves across the globe. In the heart of Parliament, a bill had quietly been released, a document so consequential that its implications could not only strip titles from some of the most famous members of the royal family, but also impose a staggering financial penalty, demanding that the Sussexes pay £500,000 in taxes. 2 days, exactly 48 hours, stood between the release of this bill and its potential enactment. 48 hours for the royal family, the media, and the world to brace for a revelation that many never saw coming. Imagine for a moment being born into a life of privilege, yet bound by rules and traditions older than most nations. Imagine carrying a title that opens doors, commands respect, and carries with it centuries of expectation. Now, imagine being told, without warning, that this identity you have carried, your position, your honor, your very place in history, could be ripped away from you in the blink of an eye. How would you react? Panic? Anger? A desperate scramble to salvage what little control remained? This is precisely the scenario facing Prince Harry and Meghan Markle as the clock ticks down. The suspense, the tension, the emotional gravity of this moment is unlike anything the modern royal family has faced in recent history. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But it wasn't just about titles. For the Sussexes, the implications were intensely personal. The bill didn't simply threaten ceremonial names etched into history. It also carried a punitive financial measure, forcing them to pay £500,000 in back taxes. For the casual observer, this might sound like a manageable sum for a couple of their stature. But the symbolism of such a levy is far greater than the monetary figure. It's a statement, a rebuke, a warning. It is as if Parliament, in one sweeping legislative act, was signaling that fame, fortune, and royal favor are no shields against scrutiny, consequence, or public judgment. And in an era where every move of the Sussexes is magnified under the relentless lens of social media and tabloid scrutiny, this could not have come at a more dramatic or vulnerable time. The unfolding drama, however, is layered with complexity. To truly grasp its depth, one must look beyond the headlines, beyond the sensationalized stories splashed across newspapers and social media feeds. This is a story of power, loyalty, and betrayal. It is a tale that spans continents, pulling together threads of American media frenzy, British political maneuvering, and the intimate dynamics of a family that has, for generations, represented both national pride and personal turmoil. For Harry and Meghan, this isn't merely a matter of politics or protocol. It is a test of identity, resilience, and the ability to navigate a world where every step is scrutinized, judged, and debated by millions. The timing of this bill's release adds an additional layer of urgency and intrigue. Only 2 days separate the release from its potential enactment, creating a pressure cooker environment in which decisions must be made quickly, statements issued carefully, and strategies implemented with precision. Within the palace walls, advisors are working around the clock, analyzing legal loopholes, potential countermeasures, and media management strategies. Every conversation, every private email, every phone call carries the weight of potential disaster or salvation. And for Harry and Meghan, the world is watching. Every misstep, every emotional reaction could be amplified into a global spectacle, further complicating their already delicate situation. The public's role in this unfolding drama cannot be understated. Across the United Kingdom, citizens are divided. Some view this as a necessary correction, a reminder that privilege must never shield individuals from accountability. Others see it as an attack, orchestrated by a system that has historically marginalized those who dare to challenge tradition. The debate is intense, emotional, and polarizing, echoing across social media, news outlets, and even private conversations in homes, workplaces, and cafes. In many ways, the public's perception will shape not only the narrative, but also the long-term consequences for the Sussexes and the monarchy as a whole. When history is being written in real time, perception often becomes as critical as reality itself. Yet, beneath the political intrigue and media spectacle lies a deeply human story, one of fear, uncertainty, and the struggle to maintain dignity under extraordinary pressure. Prince Harry, a man who has spent his life navigating the twin forces of royal expectation and personal desire for autonomy, now finds himself at a crossroads. Meghan Markle, equally in the spotlight, must contend with the compounded pressures of public scrutiny, familial tensions, and the looming threat of financial penalty. Together, they are facing a storm that is as emotional as it is political, a test of endurance that will challenge not only their relationship, but also their sense of self. The reactions within the palace are a story unto themselves. Allies and advisors alike are grappling with the implications. King Charles, tasked with balancing duty to the crown and personal loyalty to his son, must make decisions that could either exacerbate or mitigate the crisis. The media, relentless in pursuit of every detail, speculates on alliances, motives, and possible outcomes, fueling the fire and keeping the public on edge. The countdown is relentless, the stakes are monumental, and every decision carries irreversible consequences. In this high-pressure environment, even the smallest miscalculation could cascade into a scandal of historic proportions. And as if the legal and financial pressures were not enough, the emotional toll is immense. For a couple already navigating the unique challenges of life under constant public scrutiny, the prospect of having their titles removed and their finances penalized introduces an almost unbearable tension. Every conversation is fraught with uncertainty, every plan shadowed by the unknown. How do you prepare for a world in which your identity, your legacy, and your security could all be altered overnight? How do you maintain composure when the weight of public expectation and personal consequence is crushing? These are questions the Sussexes must answer in real time, and the answers are anything but simple. The story is not just about them, however. It is also a mirror reflecting the broader tensions within British society, between tradition and modernity, privilege and accountability, loyalty and independence. The bill's introduction has sparked debates not just within the corridors of power, but across living rooms, workplaces, and online communities. It challenges the very notion of monarchy in the modern age and forces a confrontation with questions that have long been simmering beneath the surface. What is the role of royalty today? How should accountability be enforced? And what happens when the rules of tradition clash with the realities of contemporary life? As the countdown continues, every moment is charged with tension. The clock is relentless. 48 hours to respond, to strategize, to weather the storm. In the coming chapters, we will delve into the inner workings of the palace, explore the intricate political maneuvers in Parliament, and examine the media frenzy that has turned public attention into a worldwide spectacle. We will witness the personal toll on Harry and Meghan, dissect the financial implications, and reveal the emotional stakes that make this story more than just headlines. It is a deeply human drama played out on a global stage. What decisions will be made in these critical hours? How will the Sussexes respond to the dual threats of title removal and financial penalty? Will loyalty to family triumph over the instinct to defend personal autonomy? Or will the pressures of the public eye drive wedges even deeper into already strained relationships? These questions, and the answers that unfold over the next few days, will define not only the legacy of Harry and Meghan, but also the evolving narrative of the British monarchy itself. The next moments are crucial, the tension palpable, and the consequences far-reaching. For the audience watching from around the world, the unfolding drama is both fascinating and unsettling. A reminder that power, privilege, and public perception are forces that can collide with devastating impact. And as we begin to peel back the layers of this story, one thing becomes clear. Nothing is certain, nothing is predictable, and every revelation brings with it the potential for both scandal and redemption. The palace was unusually quiet that morning, yet the silence carried with it an electricity that only those accustomed to the inner workings of royalty could truly feel. In private corridors lined with portraits of ancestors who had once held the fate of the nation in their hands, advisors hurried from room to room, their expressions tense, voices hushed. The announcement from Parliament, which had slipped out in the early hours, was more than a mere legal formality. It was a bombshell, a calculated move that threatened to strip Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of the very identities they had fought to balance with their new, independent life. The removal of their titles and the imposed tax of £500,000 was not just legislation. It was a message, and its implications reverberated through every corner of the monarchy. Inside Harry and Meghan's residence, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. A legal team had been summoned immediately after the news broke. Phones buzzed relentlessly, and aides scurried to fetch documents, emails, and confidential memos. The Sussexes, who had grown accustomed to scrutiny in the public eye, now faced a pressure that was intimate and relentless, hitting at their personal sense of security and identity. Harry paced the room, each step echoing a tension that could be felt by anyone standing nearby. He was a man trained to perform under pressure, yet this was different. Titles, wealth, legal battles, public opinion. These were forces that even he could not command entirely. Meghan, sitting with her head in her hands, exhaled sharply, a mixture of frustration and disbelief crossing her face. "How could they do this now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible but heavy with emotion. The legal implications of the bill were immediately dissected. It wasn't just the removal of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles. The legislation explicitly stated that the pair would be financially responsible for taxes that had been previously waived under royal protocols. The £500,000 figure was symbolic as much as it was practical. It served as a clear boundary, a delineation between what the monarchy could tolerate and what Parliament would enforce. Sources within the palace explained that this move had been in the works for months, quietly discussed among key members of the government, but the timing and public disclosure were designed to maximize impact. By releasing it with only 2 days before potential enactment, Parliament ensured that the Sussexes would have minimal time to prepare a defense, issue public statements, or manage media narratives to their favor. Meanwhile, whispers spread through Westminster about the unusual coalition of MPs who had supported the measure. It wasn't the usual partisan division. Conservatives, traditionally protective of the monarchy, were joining with a contingent of reformist members to push the bill forward. Analysts speculated that this alignment reflected broader political pressures. Public sentiment had shifted, with a rising number of citizens questioning whether royal privileges were being abused. Financial accountability, transparency, and fairness were words repeated in speeches and debates. Yet behind these formal statements lay a more personal and, some argued, vindictive undertone. The Sussexes' choice to live independently in America, while publicly asserting their autonomy, had irked some within Parliament and the royal establishment. What might have been a distant concern in previous decades had now crystallized into a decisive and very public confrontation. The media frenzy began almost instantly. British tabloids led with headlines emphasizing the shocking nature of the bill. Sussex titles on the line. Royal family faces unprecedented move. £500,000 tax shocker for Harry and Meghan. International media quickly picked up the story, adding layers of speculation and drama. In Los Angeles, where the couple now resided, journalists camped outside their home, cameras rolling, eager for any statement, any reaction that could be broadcast globally. Social media amplified every detail, with hashtags trending within minutes, opinions pouring in from both supporters and critics. The narrative was no longer just about Parliament and palace protocol. It had become a worldwide spectacle, a story that everyone felt entitled to weigh in on. Inside the palace, King Charles convened a series of meetings with senior advisors and family members. These were not casual conversations. They were emergency sessions designed to gauge responses, anticipate public reaction, and consider the implications for broader family dynamics. Charles, who had spent decades navigating the delicate balance between tradition and modernization, now faced one of his most challenging moments. How should he respond? Should he support the bill and enforce parliamentary decisions, maintaining the dignity of the institution but potentially alienating his son? Or should he intervene discreetly, attempting to protect Harry and Meghan from the public and financial blow, at the risk of undermining the legislative authority? Every option carried emotional and political consequences. Advisors presented an array of scenarios. One suggested immediate engagement with the media, framing the bill as a misunderstanding of intent, emphasizing the Sussexes' contributions to charitable causes and public service. Another recommended a more combative approach, challenging Parliament's authority to impose financial penalties on royals who had voluntarily distanced themselves from official duties. Yet another highlighted the long-term implications for the monarchy's image. If the titles were removed, would public trust in the institution increase due to perceived fairness, or would it decrease, seen as internal family conflicts spilling onto the global stage? Outside the palace, public reaction was equally complex. Polls conducted within hours showed a deeply divided populace. Some citizens, frustrated with the perception of unchecked royal privilege, applauded the move as overdue accountability. Others, who felt loyalty to the family and respect for tradition, decried it as an unnecessary and public attack on individuals who had already made sacrifices and endured relentless scrutiny. Commentators on radio and television debated endlessly, dissecting motivations, predicting outcomes, and offering moral judgments. In every corner of the country, conversations erupted in homes, workplaces, and cafes, each interpretation adding to the pressure on Harry and Meghan. Back in Los Angeles, the couple's legal and financial advisors worked frantically to prepare responses. The logistics of the £500,000 tax payment, should the bill be enacted, were daunting, but the symbolic impact was even more severe. Paying such a fine would not just be a financial matter. It would be interpreted publicly as an admission of wrongdoing or failure to comply with expectations, regardless of the legal nuances. Each day, each hour, each decision carried weight, magnified exponentially by global attention. Beyond the immediate political and financial dimensions, there was the human element, how Harry and Meghan would process this attack on both identity and legacy. Personal friends and confidants described an emotional roller coaster, from disbelief and anger to sadness and uncertainty. Harry, who had long spoken about the pressures of living in the public eye, confronted a new layer of scrutiny, one that questioned his decisions, his loyalty, and his very place within the monarchy. Meghan, who had endured years of relentless criticism, now faced an institutional challenge that combined legal, financial, and emotional stress. Together, they navigated not just the logistics of the moment, but the psychological weight, knowing that whatever actions they took would be analyzed, criticized, and broadcast around the world. Experts in royal affairs emphasized that this was unprecedented. Never before had a sitting parliament imposed such direct consequences on a modern royal couple living abroad. While the monarchy had faced challenges, scandals, and public criticism, this level of direct legislative action, paired with financial penalties, marked a turning point. Analysts speculated that this could set a precedent for how future generations of royals are held accountable, especially those who choose to step away from traditional duties. The intersection of personal choice, public expectation, and political authority was being tested in real time, with Harry and Meghan at the center. As the hours passed, the tension mounted. Every phone call, every email, every media headline contributed to a sense of urgency. Advisors reminded the couple that with only 2 days before potential enactment, there was no time for delay. Every strategy had to be considered, every public statement weighed carefully. Missteps could not only exacerbate the situation but also provide fodder for critics eager to frame the Sussexes as reckless or irresponsible. In this environment, calm deliberation was a luxury few could afford. And yet, amidst the legal documents, media frenzy, and political maneuvering, there was a quiet determination within the Sussexes. Both Harry and Meghan were acutely aware that how they responded in these critical hours would shape not only their legacy, but also the public's perception of their character and resilience. Their choices, whether conciliatory, assertive, or strategic, would reverberate far beyond these 2 days, influencing public discourse, historical record, and their own personal narrative. In the midst of this storm, the question remained, how would the Sussexes navigate one of the most tense and consequential moments of their lives? Would they manage to turn the pressure into a display of strength, or would the combination of legal, financial, and emotional forces prove overwhelming? As the clock continued its relentless countdown, the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would define not just the couple's immediate future, but potentially the course of the British monarchy itself. While the public buzzed over the immediate shock of the bill, behind the scenes, the real drama unfolded in whispers and closed-door negotiations that few outside Parliament had any access to. The removal of Harry and Meghan's titles and the imposition of the £500,000 tax were not sudden impulses. They were the culmination of months, perhaps even years, of political maneuvering, palace strategy, and public sentiment calculations. Every clause in the bill, every stipulation regarding financial responsibility, reflected not only the authority of Parliament, but also a deeply layered strategy designed to assert control over a royal couple increasingly living life on their own terms. Within the marble halls of Westminster, discussions were far more nuanced than the sensational headlines suggested. Some MPs argued passionately that the Sussexes' independence had set a precedent that could unravel centuries of tradition. If royals could step away from duties yet retain privileges, what message would it send about accountability, responsibility, and fairness? Others countered that the couple had voluntarily distanced themselves, had sought to forge a new path, and were entitled to privacy and freedom. The debate was heated, and behind the closed doors, alliances formed and fractured with surprising speed. Some traditionalists were quietly angry, feeling that the monarchy's dignity had been tested, while reformists saw an opportunity to assert legislative power in a way that could resonate with public calls for accountability. The advisors who had drafted the bill were meticulous in their language. There was no ambiguity about the financial repercussions. The £500,000 tax was explicit, tied to privileges that were no longer automatically granted. Legal analysts noted that while the figure seemed punitive, it was also symbolic, a way of signaling that the monarchy, even in its most iconic forms, was subject to modern rules and oversight. The bill's architects understood that timing was everything. Releasing it with only 2 days before formal enactment maximized pressure on Harry and Meghan, leaving them little time to maneuver, negotiate, or mitigate the impact through public relations campaigns. Every word, every line, was chosen with a dual purpose: to assert authority and to send a public message of transparency and fairness. But the story was never just about politics and finance. It was deeply personal, woven into the intricate fabric of family dynamics and emotional history. Sources close to the palace revealed that relationships between key members of the royal family were strained to their limits. Old grievances, lingering misunderstandings, and unspoken frustrations all contributed to an atmosphere in which the bill could gain momentum. Harry, despite his distance from the monarchy, was a figure of immense emotional significance. His choices, his public persona, and his actions had long been scrutinized, not only by the press but by the family itself. Meghan, equally under the microscope, carried the weight of public expectation, cultural scrutiny, and personal loyalty. Together, they represented both defiance and opportunity. Defiance to some, opportunity for reformers to challenge tradition in a very visible way. As the bill moved quietly through parliamentary committees, negotiations were taking place over the media narrative. Some senior advisors recommended a full-scale media blackout until the final wording was published, fearing leaks that could inflame public opinion or mischaracterize intentions. Others argued for controlled briefings, hoping to frame the Sussexes' position as reasonable, cooperative, and principled. It was a delicate balancing act. Too much public exposure risked creating a backlash against the monarchy itself. Too little could be interpreted as secrecy or evasion. Each choice, each word, was weighed against both legal and emotional consequences, a chess game with unprecedented stakes. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan's team was working around the clock. Legal experts combed through every clause, analyzing precedents, assessing liabilities, and preparing potential challenges. Financial consultants calculated the implications of immediate payment versus negotiation, projecting worst-case and best-case scenarios. Public relations strategists crafted messages that could resonate globally, careful not to appear defensive while asserting the couple's rights. The pressure was immense, magnified by the ticking clock. With each passing hour, the weight of expectation, scrutiny, and consequence grew, and the sense of urgency became nearly tangible. In London, King Charles consulted with his most trusted advisors, exploring every possible avenue to respond without appearing partial or undermining Parliament. For a man accustomed to balancing tradition with public sentiment, the situation was uniquely complex. On one hand, his son faced what many considered a public and humiliating challenge. On the other, Charles was acutely aware of the broader implications for the monarchy and the perception of fairness among the British people. His choices were not merely familial. They were strategic, political, and deeply emotional, requiring an equilibrium few could manage. As Parliament prepared for formal voting, speculation ran rampant about potential loopholes, last-minute amendments, or secret agreements that could influence the outcome. Insiders suggested that some lawmakers were quietly sympathetic to the Sussexes' situation but unwilling to oppose the bill openly, fearing political backlash or accusations of favoritism. Others were openly determined to see it passed, viewing it as a necessary assertion of legislative authority over the royal household. The tension was palpable, a complex interplay of public perception, personal judgment, and institutional power. At the same time, global media attention amplified every development. Analysts in New York, Paris, and Sydney debated the implications, drawing comparisons to past royal controversies and projecting potential outcomes. Social media discussions became battlegrounds of opinion, with supporters of the couple expressing outrage and opponents highlighting what they viewed as overdue accountability. Every tweet, article, and news segment added layers of pressure, creating a feedback loop in which public perception and political strategy influenced each other in real time. The human dimension of the story, however, remained central. Close friends of Harry and Meghan spoke of the emotional toll, sleepless nights, constant meetings, and the relentless scrutiny of both the public and private spheres. The couple's determination to act strategically while maintaining dignity was remarkable, yet every step required careful consideration. Decisions that might seem trivial, whether to issue a statement, engage a particular lawyer, or attend a specific meeting, carried weight, amplified by global attention and the broader stakes of royal protocol and personal legacy. As the two-day countdown progressed, every moment seemed to compress, creating a pressure cooker environment. Advisors reminded the Sussexes that the next 48 hours could define not just the outcome of the bill, but also public narrative, family relations, and historical record. Every decision, every word, every gesture would be magnified, analyzed, and remembered. The stakes were clear. Success would require a combination of legal precision, emotional intelligence, and strategic communication. Missteps could be catastrophic, carrying consequences far beyond the immediate financial penalty or loss of titles. And yet, amid the mounting tension, there was an undeniable undercurrent of resilience. Harry and Meghan had faced relentless scrutiny, personal attacks, and institutional challenges before. Each obstacle had tested them. Each controversy had demanded endurance, and each challenge had honed their ability to navigate the complex interplay of public expectation and personal integrity. The bill represented a new kind of challenge, one that combined political pressure, financial consequence, and emotional weight. But their history suggested a capacity for strategic, composed response, even in the most unforgiving spotlight. As the day drew to a close, the political machinery hummed relentlessly. Advisors debated final wording, media outlets prepared breaking stories, and the Sussexes continued to navigate a storm of unprecedented intensity. Every participant, from lawmakers in Westminster to aides in Los Angeles, understood that these 2 days would be remembered not only for the immediate outcome, but for the intricate web of human, political, and emotional stakes they revealed. The story was far from over, but the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, one in which power, principle, and personal resilience would collide in a public spectacle watched by millions around the world. As news of the Parliament bill broke, the world seemed to explode into a frenzy of opinion, speculation, and relentless commentary. Within hours, news channels, online platforms, and social media were flooded with reactions that ranged from outrage to vindication. Headlines screamed in bold, dramatic fonts, "Sussexes targeted by Parliament, royal privileges no more," and 500,000 tax for Harry and Meghan. The public, seemingly split, became an integral part of the unfolding drama, their opinions amplifying the stakes far beyond the walls of Westminster or the private residences of the royal family. Across the United Kingdom, ordinary citizens engaged in heated debates. Coffee shop conversations turned into impromptu forums. Workplaces echoed with discussions about fairness, accountability, and the monarchy's role in a modern democracy. Many questioned the logic of penalizing a couple who had voluntarily stepped back from royal duties, arguing that their independence should not attract punishment. Others insisted that privilege must come with responsibility, and that no one, not even royals, should be above rules, laws, or societal expectations. Every perspective was amplified by the immediacy of social media, where Twitter threads could spark viral outrage and Facebook groups could organize collective sentiment in minutes. In the United States, where the Sussexes had made their home, the media's response was equally intense, but with a different lens. Analysts debated the cultural differences between American values of independence and British reverence for tradition. Opinion pieces pondered whether the bill was a symbolic gesture or a calculated strategy to reassert authority over a family member who had become both a media lightning rod and a source of royal discomfort. Morning shows, cable news segments, and online platforms dissected the story minute by minute, with legal experts weighing in on the potential implications of forcing a £500,000 payment on someone no longer actively serving royal duties. Tabloid newspapers, as expected, escalated the drama, often stretching facts to emphasize tension. Headlines like "The Sussex Siege" and "Parliament Strikes Back" captured the imagination, mixing hyperbole with legitimate concern over transparency and accountability. The public, hungry for detail and emotional engagement, lapped up every development, sharing articles, clips, and opinions across networks, fueling an endless cycle of discussion, speculation, and analysis. Within this media storm, the Sussexes' every move or absence was scrutinized, dissected, and evaluated against both historical precedent and the expectations of a contemporary audience. Amid the public uproar, social media became a battleground of narratives. Fans of the couple organized online campaigns to raise awareness and show support, using hashtags that trended globally within hours. Supporters framed the bill as an unfair attack, a punitive measure aimed at a couple who had sought to live authentically and independently, challenging centuries-old expectations without causing harm. Opponents countered, emphasizing accountability, fairness, and precedent, framing the Sussexes as outliers who had enjoyed privilege without fulfilling corresponding duties. The debate grew increasingly polarized, emotional, and sometimes vitriolic, reflecting deeper societal questions about authority, responsibility, and the balance between individual freedom and institutional expectations. Celebrity commentary added another layer to the narrative. Figures in entertainment and media weighed in publicly, offering perspectives that ranged from empathetic to critical. Some praised Harry and Meghan's courage in stepping back from the monarchy and pursuing autonomy, arguing that the bill represented a cruel overreach by an institution struggling to maintain relevance. Others, however, questioned the couple's choices, suggesting that living under a microscope inevitably involved scrutiny, accountability, and financial responsibility. Each comment, tweet, or interview contributed to a growing maelstrom of opinion, magnifying emotional stakes and keeping the story at the forefront of public consciousness. While much of the coverage focused on financial consequences, the emotional dimension of the story was equally compelling. Reporters highlighted the personal toll on the Sussexes, long hours of legal preparation, sleepless nights, and the constant balancing act of protecting family privacy while responding to unprecedented scrutiny. Friends and former colleagues shared anecdotes about the couple's resilience, their meticulous planning, and the emotional strain of navigating a global media storm. The public, despite opinions that differed, could empathize with the human side of the narrative, making the unfolding events resonate beyond politics and law into a realm of personal struggle, perseverance, and vulnerability. In addition to mainstream media, independent investigative journalists dug into the history of royal finances, privileges, and precedent. Articles explored prior instances where royals had faced financial or legal challenges, comparing those scenarios to the current situation. Analyses highlighted that while the Sussexes' voluntary separation from duties was unprecedented in modern times, the legal and symbolic implications were consistent with long-standing principles of accountability within the monarchy. By framing the story in historical context, journalists added depth, helping the public understand the magnitude and potential ramifications of Parliament's decision. The emotional tone of reporting varied widely. Some outlets focused on outrage, painting Harry and Meghan as victims of a political and institutional power play, while others emphasized the necessity of rules, portraying the couple's independence as a challenge to an institution designed to maintain order and tradition. This duality created a narrative tension that kept viewers, readers, and social media users engaged, provoking reactions that were intense, personal, and often polarized. The story transcended borders, sparking conversations about fairness, privilege, and accountability not only within the United Kingdom but globally. Amid this whirlwind, the Sussexes remained a study in strategic restraint. Public statements were measured, crafted with precision to convey concern, dignity, and reason without inflaming the situation. Legal teams continued to analyze the bill, preparing responses and evaluating potential negotiations. Advisors monitored public sentiment, social media trends, and media coverage minute by minute, adjusting communication strategies to maintain clarity and emotional resonance. Every statement, or carefully chosen silence, became a calculated move in a high-stakes, multidimensional chess game. Meanwhile, opinion polls began to capture a snapshot of public sentiment. Analysts reported fluctuating levels of support and criticism, often highlighting generational and geographic divides. Younger audiences tended to view the bill as punitive and outdated, expressing empathy for the Sussexes' pursuit of autonomy. Older demographics, by contrast, frequently emphasized tradition, duty, and the symbolic importance of royal accountability. These insights, widely shared by media outlets, added complexity to the narrative, showing that public opinion was not monolithic but multifaceted, dynamic, and deeply intertwined with cultural values, historical perspectives, and emotional investment. The emotional climax of this chapter emerged as global attention coalesced into an unavoidable crescendo. The Sussexes' response, the public reaction, and the final countdown of 2 days merged into a moment of suspense and intensity. The interplay of political maneuvering, media frenzy, public sentiment, and personal stakes created a narrative that was emotionally charged, globally visible, and impossible to ignore. The pressure was palpable, a tension that threaded through every article, broadcast, and social media post, leaving audiences captivated, divided, and emotionally invested. By the end of this period, it became clear that the media storm was more than mere reporting. It was a force shaping perception, influencing decisions, and heightening the emotional resonance of every choice made by both the Sussexes and Parliament. The combination of financial stakes, institutional authority, public opinion, and personal resilience created a uniquely high-pressure environment, the kind that defined a historical moment in real time. The story was no longer just about titles, taxes, or tradition. It was about the human capacity to navigate scrutiny, challenge, and consequence in an age where every action is magnified, analyzed, and remembered. Behind the grand, imposing walls of Buckingham Palace and the private residences of the royal family, an intricate web of strategy, emotion, and tension was quietly unfolding. While the public debated, argued, and speculated, the Sussexes and the monarchy were engaged in a more calculated, nuanced battle. One that combined legal maneuvering, personal reflection, and media management into a high-stakes exercise in survival and influence. Understanding what was happening behind closed doors adds a layer of depth to the story, revealing the stakes, the players, and the emotional currents that were invisible to the public eye but vital to the unfolding drama. For Harry and Meghan, the situation was as much about perception as it was about legality. Every move had to be carefully calibrated to protect their reputation, secure their financial and personal independence, and maintain a sense of dignity despite what many perceived as a coordinated assault on their autonomy. Legal advisors worked tirelessly, reviewing the text of the bill in detail, exploring historical precedent, and considering every possible response. The Sussexes were advised to maintain measured communication, statements that were neither confrontational nor submissive, designed to assert rights without inflaming tensions further. Every word was dissected, every gesture scrutinized, because in this environment, even the smallest action could be transformed into a headline, a meme, or a social media storm. Inside the palace, reactions were intense and varied. Senior members of the royal family reportedly held private meetings, discussing strategy, messaging, and optics. Some were concerned about the public fallout, aware that the move to remove titles and impose a financial penalty could be perceived as harsh or punitive, potentially generating sympathy for Harry and Meghan. Others focused on principle, emphasizing tradition, duty, and the importance of setting precedent. The debates were heated but discreet, conducted behind closed doors, shielded from journalists and the public eye, yet their consequences would reverberate in every statement, every policy decision, and every media interaction over the coming days. Counselors and advisors on both sides understood that the public narrative could not be ignored. A war of perception was underway, and controlling it required an intricate understanding of media dynamics, public sentiment, and international attention. Strategists analyzed coverage across multiple platforms, tracking not only the tone of reporting but also the emotional impact on audiences. They knew that headlines had the power to shape opinions, tweets could sway narratives, and video clips could cement perceptions in ways that were often irreversible. In essence, the palace and the Sussex team were engaged in a battle for narrative control, a contest as crucial as the legal or financial stakes themselves. Emotionally, the situation weighed heavily on the Sussexes. Friends and insiders described Harry as tense, often retreating into reflection and private strategy sessions, balancing anger, frustration, and concern for the family he had left behind with the responsibility of protecting his wife and children. Meghan, described by those close to her as resolute yet deeply aware of the stakes, spent long hours coordinating with advisors, legal teams, and media strategists, ensuring that their response was deliberate, calculated, and in line with their long-term objectives. The emotional toll was compounded by the relentless scrutiny. Private moments were often interrupted by leaks, speculation, or media misinterpretation, leaving them navigating a landscape where personal boundaries were constantly tested. Within the palace, reactions to the Sussexes' calculated responses were equally complex. Some senior figures reportedly admired the couple's ability to remain poised, recognizing the skill required to manage such intense public pressure with composure. Others interpreted measured responses as a challenge to authority, a sign that the Sussexes were asserting autonomy in ways that could inspire dissent or encourage media exploitation. Meetings and briefings highlighted the tension between maintaining family cohesion and enforcing tradition, a delicate balance complicated further by the global attention the story had attracted. Legal discussions formed a central part of the palace's internal considerations. Experts analyzed not only the implications of removing titles and imposing the financial penalty, but also the symbolic weight of these actions. Precedent, historical context, and potential international reactions were debated at length, with advisors mapping out every possible scenario. Could the bill set a legal and symbolic precedent for future generations? How would foreign media and royal watchers interpret the action? Could this embolden critics of the monarchy or fuel campaigns for reform? These were questions that went far beyond the immediate conflict, highlighting the profound complexity of decisions that might, on the surface, appear straightforward but carried centuries of tradition, symbolism, and global scrutiny. At the same time, internal palace communications emphasized messaging strategy. Every official statement, public engagement, and ceremonial appearance was evaluated for potential impact on public perception. Spokespersons worked to ensure consistency, clarity, and emotional resonance, aiming to project authority and fairness while minimizing accusations of vindictiveness. Media monitoring teams tracked the tone of coverage, identifying emerging trends, viral moments, and potential misinterpretations, ensuring that advisors could respond swiftly and effectively to any narrative shifts. The interplay of public communication, media perception, and internal strategy became a delicate dance, where timing, wording, and emotional tone were crucial. The Sussexes, aware of the stakes, also engaged in private reflection on their own strategy. Every decision, whether to respond publicly, engage in legal action, or maintain silence, was considered in light of potential emotional, financial, and reputational consequences. They weighed loyalty to family, responsibility to their children, and the desire for independence against the inevitability of public judgment and media scrutiny. Decisions that might seem simple and private were magnified into matters of national conversation, requiring foresight, patience, and an understanding of human behavior on an extraordinary scale. As the countdown to the parliamentary deadline continued, tension within the palace and within the Sussex camp escalated. Meetings became more frequent, discussions more urgent, and the emotional intensity increased. Advisors and family members alike understood that the next 48 hours would be decisive, not only for the couple but for the monarchy, the public narrative, and historical precedent. Every action, communication, and reaction had the potential to reverberate far beyond the immediate situation, shaping perceptions and outcomes in ways that were both visible and invisible, immediate and long-term. By the end of this intense period, it became clear that the stakes were unprecedented. The Sussexes' independence, the monarchy's authority, and the public's perception all converged into a high-pressure crucible. Decisions taken, strategies employed, and reactions observed would determine not only the outcome of the bill, but also the emotional, cultural, and historical significance of the events as they unfolded. The palace, the media, and the public were all participants in a narrative that blended law, tradition, emotion, and spectacle. A story where the line between personal and political, private and public, human and symbolic, was increasingly blurred. As news of Parliament's decision to remove the Sussexes' titles and impose the $500,000 tax broke, the world's media machines ignited. Headlines flashed across screens in London, New York, Sydney, and Johannesburg almost simultaneously, each outlet framing the story in a way that mirrored its editorial priorities, national sentiment, and audience expectations. The sheer speed and intensity of coverage transformed a legal and financial maneuver into a global spectacle, amplifying emotions, fueling speculation, and shaping narratives that the royal family and the Sussexes could scarcely control. In Britain, tabloids ran banner stories that blended fact with commentary, combining legal details with editorialized takes on loyalty, privilege, and accountability. Sussex in crisis, royal titles stripped, screamed one headline, while another opted for a more confrontational approach. Harry and Meghan faced the consequences of defiance. Opinion columns quickly followed, debating everything from financial fairness to family loyalty, often drawing historical comparisons to previous royal conflicts. The framing was consistent. This was not just a legal or parliamentary matter. It was a moral, emotional, and cultural moment that touched the deepest veins of national identity. Internationally, the story took on a new dimension. In the United States, major networks highlighted Meghan's celebrity status, portraying the couple's predicament as an intersection of royalty, fame, and financial obligation. Analysts discussed not only the implications for the monarchy, but also the potential impact on international relations, public opinion, and brand perception. Social media platforms exploded with user-generated content, memes, and commentary, creating an ever-growing echo chamber of opinion and speculation. Every tweet, Instagram post, and video clip became a node in a sprawling network of narrative dissemination, reaching millions of viewers within minutes and contributing to a climate of heightened emotional intensity. The coverage was relentless, leaving little room for reflection or private strategy. For Harry and Meghan, each headline carried weight, each analysis could influence public perception, and each viral post had the power to affect emotional and strategic decisions. Their communications team worked around the clock, monitoring coverage, tracking trends, and advising on timing, tone, and content of responses. Every interaction was weighed for its potential impact. A misstep could be magnified into a global controversy, while a well-timed message could shift perception, garner sympathy, or preempt negative narratives. Public reaction mirrored the intensity of the media coverage. Social media was alive with debate, from loyal supporters expressing outrage at what they viewed as punitive treatment to critics emphasizing accountability and tradition. Polls conducted during this period showed a nation divided. Some saw the Sussexes as victims of an outdated, rigid system, while others viewed the removal of titles and tax imposition as a necessary correction to perceived privilege and independence from royal responsibilities. Across platforms, hashtags trended, petitions circulated, and comment sections became battlegrounds where personal opinion collided with historical context, legal understanding, and emotional engagement. Within the palace, the media storm was both a challenge and an opportunity. Advisors recognized that public sentiment could influence political and social outcomes, shaping not only perception but also the broader narrative around monarchy, family loyalty, and the public's understanding of tradition versus modernity. Media teams within the royal institution coordinated carefully, issuing statements, clarifying points of law, and responding to inquiries with measured, deliberate phrasing. Each communication was intended to reinforce authority, maintain credibility, and mitigate potential backlash while preserving the dignity of the institution. Harry and Meghan, meanwhile, faced a unique set of challenges. The global coverage amplified every private concern into a public spectacle, leaving the couple under continuous scrutiny. Friends described their emotional state as a mix of frustration, anxiety, and resolve. They were navigating not only a complex legal and financial situation, but also an unprecedented media environment, where the lines between truth, interpretation, and opinion were constantly blurred. Every appearance, statement, and post was calculated to protect their image while conveying fairness, dignity, and emotional authenticity. Analysts and commentators also debated the symbolic significance of the tax and title removal. Some framed it as a statement on accountability, highlighting the principle that no one, regardless of status, is above financial or legal obligations. Others emphasized the human cost, exploring the emotional ramifications of stripping titles that carry not only honor but identity, heritage, and symbolic connection to centuries of tradition. Commentators drew parallels to historical precedents, comparing the situation to past instances where royal titles were removed or financial penalties imposed, underscoring the rarity and significance of the current actions. Across the globe, viewers and readers engaged with the story emotionally. Some expressed empathy, relating to the feelings of isolation, scrutiny, or familial tension. Others felt satisfaction at what they perceived as justice served. The narrative became a mirror, reflecting societal values, opinions on wealth and privilege, and perspectives on loyalty, duty, and consequence. Each new report, image, or revelation added layers to the story, deepening its emotional resonance and ensuring that engagement remained high, whether fueled by curiosity, outrage, or intrigue. Media coverage also highlighted strategic differences in framing between outlets. While British tabloids leaned heavily on history, tradition, and family duty, international outlets emphasized celebrity, human interest, and financial accountability. This created multiple parallel narratives, each influencing its audience in different ways, while social media amplified emotional responses, often blending humor, criticism, and sympathy into viral, shareable content. Every day, the story evolved, with new angles, leaks, or analyses adding complexity, ensuring that no one narrative dominated entirely, but that the overall emotional and factual weight of the situation remained immense. Within this storm, the Sussexes were forced to navigate an intricate web of perception management, emotional resilience, and strategic communication. Every public appearance, every social media post, and every statement was designed to balance personal integrity, legal strategy, and media impact. The constant interplay between private deliberation and public exposure created a heightened state of tension, making even mundane decisions subject to intense scrutiny and emotional pressure. The result was a global media phenomenon, a confluence of law, tradition, celebrity, and public sentiment, where every development carried weight, every narrative influenced opinion, and every emotional beat was magnified. The story was no longer confined to Parliament, the palace, or the Sussexes themselves. It had become a shared, worldwide experience, a real-time drama unfolding across screens, newspapers, and social media feeds. The implications, the emotions, and the human stories behind the headlines set the stage for the next act, where legal, personal, and symbolic stakes would converge in a way that promised unprecedented intensity. The announcement of a $500,000 tax levied against the Sussexes sent shockwaves through both financial circles and royal watchers alike. While the removal of titles had already stirred public debate and media frenzy, the imposition of a substantial tax added a tangible, immediate consequence that could no longer be debated in abstract or symbolic terms. This was money, hard, undeniable, and unavoidable, and its weight carried far beyond the figures themselves. For Harry and Meghan, the tax was not merely a financial burden. It became a symbol of accountability, a marker of public and parliamentary scrutiny, and a new layer of emotional and strategic pressure that compounded an already tense situation. Financial experts were quick to weigh in, dissecting the implications for both the couple and the monarchy at large. Analysts noted that $500,000 represented more than just a numerical sum. It was a reflection of the delicate balance between privilege, public expectation, and legal responsibility. Comparisons were drawn to historical precedents where royals faced monetary obligations, and the Sussexes' situation was highlighted as a rare instance of direct fiscal consequence tied to parliamentary action. News outlets highlighted the fact that this was not a standard fine or penalty, but a calculated act of oversight and assertion, sending a clear message to anyone within or near the monarchy. Public status comes with accountability, whether moral, symbolic, or financial. Behind closed doors, the Sussexes were forced to confront the practical realities of this sudden financial demand. Friends close to the couple described a mix of frustration, disbelief, and strategic recalibration. Legal and financial advisors were immediately engaged, reviewing statements, calculating possible deductions, and exploring potential avenues for appeal or mitigation. The conversation extended beyond the immediate sum. It encompassed broader considerations of public image, media messaging, and potential long-term consequences for their financial independence and lifestyle. Every decision had to balance legal accuracy, emotional resonance, and public perception, a complex equation made more volatile by the intense media spotlight. The public reaction to the tax was as polarized as it had been for the removal of titles. Some hailed the move as a long-overdue enforcement of fairness, a demonstration that wealth and status did not grant immunity from legal or financial responsibility. Editorials emphasized themes of justice, societal expectation, and accountability, framing the tax as a corrective action that reinforced moral and civic norms. On the other hand, supporters of the Sussexes expressed outrage, claiming that the financial imposition was punitive, disproportionate, and designed to humiliate the couple publicly. Social media became an arena of heated debate, with hashtags, polls, and viral threads dissecting both the morality and legality of the tax, often mixing historical context with contemporary social opinion. Financial commentators explored the intricate layers of the tax itself. They highlighted that the levy was not only retroactive but also tied to broader questions about income, public funding, and private enterprise. Reports suggested that the calculation considered not only personal earnings but also engagements, sponsorships, and potential commercial ventures connected to the Sussexes. Legal experts speculated on the implications for future financial obligations, warning that precedent could establish a framework for accountability that might affect other members of the royal family or prominent public figures. Every detail was scrutinized, every number debated, and every projection discussed with a level of intensity rarely seen outside of major global financial scandals. For the couple, the tax also had symbolic weight. Beyond the immediate financial consequence, it represented a public acknowledgement of oversight and control, a subtle yet profound reminder that independence from royal privileges carried costs. Friends and confidants described moments of tension as the Sussexes weighed options for payment, public response, and potential legal challenge. These conversations were not purely financial. They were deeply emotional, tied to feelings of fairness, loyalty, and the struggle to balance personal freedom with public responsibility. Every decision carried not only material implications, but also emotional and reputational ones, amplifying the stress and stakes of the situation. The story of the $500,000 tax quickly became intertwined with broader narratives about wealth, privilege, and accountability. Media outlets highlighted how the levy exemplified the tension between public expectation and private autonomy, a theme that resonated not only with royal watchers, but also with citizens navigating their own relationships with status, finance, and societal responsibility. Opinion pieces explored the broader social ramifications, questioning whether the tax represented a trend toward transparency and accountability or a targeted measure designed to signal authority, enforce conformity, and control narrative. As the financial details emerged, commentators also speculated on the ripple effects on Harry and Meghan's business ventures. Questions arose regarding how they would reconcile the tax with ongoing media projects, speaking engagements, and charitable initiatives. Could they absorb the cost without affecting their lifestyle or philanthropic ambitions? Would this create tension with partners, sponsors, or financial institutions? Analysts weighed the risk of negative publicity against the practical necessity of compliance, noting that any misstep could create further controversy or undermine public sympathy. Within the palace, the tax announcement was both a strategic assertion and a demonstration of discipline. Advisors and officials understood that public perception of fairness, accountability, and royal governance could be influenced as much by financial decisions as by ceremonial or symbolic actions. The imposition of a concrete monetary obligation conveyed authority, sent a clear message to both the Sussexes and the public, and reinforced the principle that status and responsibility were inseparable. Each move was calculated to achieve maximum clarity and impact, shaping the narrative and reinforcing the monarchy's position in a rapidly evolving media landscape. By the time the news cycle had fully absorbed the story, the $500,000 tax had become a touchstone for national conversation, international reporting, and personal reflection. It was no longer simply a fiscal event. It was an emotional and symbolic milestone, a test of resilience, and a catalyst for debate about fairness, independence, and consequence. Every stakeholder, from journalists and analysts to supporters and critics, found themselves grappling with both the numbers and the narrative, recognizing that the Sussexes' situation had become emblematic of broader societal questions about privilege, accountability, and public scrutiny. In this financial maelstrom, the Sussexes had to navigate multiple layers of impact simultaneously. They faced the material reality of the tax, the strategic necessity of managing perception, and the emotional weight of public scrutiny. Each decision was a balancing act, weighing personal, legal, and societal considerations, and every action had the potential to shift public sentiment, media narratives, or parliamentary attention. The financial fallout, far from being a static event, became a dynamic force driving emotional tension, strategic calculation, and narrative development across all arenas of public life. The moment news broke about the Sussexes facing a $500,000 tax alongside the removal of their titles, social media erupted in a cacophony of opinions, outrage, and speculation. The story did not merely exist in headlines. It became a full-blown digital phenomenon, spreading across platforms with astonishing speed. Within hours, hashtags ranged from sympathetic support for the couple to harsh condemnations of perceived arrogance or entitlement. The public outcry reflected more than just interest in royal affairs. It tapped into deeply ingrained societal tensions about fairness, wealth, and accountability, magnifying the emotional stakes of the unfolding story. Television networks immediately picked up the narrative, turning routine news cycles into dramatic panels and roundtable discussions. Analysts, royal commentators, and former palace insiders were brought on to dissect every aspect of the tax and its implications. The conversation was both factual and highly emotional, with journalists framing questions not just around legality, but around morality. Did the Sussexes deserve this scrutiny? Was this a fair consequence of their actions, or a calculated public shaming? In every broadcast, the story was contextualized to emphasize drama, tension, and conflict, ensuring the narrative captured the full attention of viewers across generations. Editorials in leading newspapers offered sharply divergent perspectives, highlighting the polarization of public opinion. Some op-eds praised the move as a definitive assertion of fairness, a reminder that even the wealthy and famous are bound by the same rules as ordinary citizens. Phrases like accountability cannot be bypassed and privilege comes with responsibility were repeated across multiple columns, reinforcing the narrative that the monarchy, while symbolic, must remain an institution that reflects societal expectations. Conversely, opinion pieces sympathetic to the Sussexes described the tax as a punitive measure, emphasizing the emotional strain and public humiliation that accompanied the legal and financial consequences. Headlines framed the story in emotive terms: the Sussexes' public trial, or a crownless punishment, invoking imagery that made the public feel as if they were witnessing a live spectacle of judgment. The public itself became an active participant in the drama. Social media polls, viral threads, and video reactions proliferated at a staggering pace. People debated the justice, fairness, and necessity of the tax with fierce intensity. Some users posted calculations comparing the Sussexes' tax obligation to average national earnings, emphasizing the scale of the figure and framing it in terms of societal inequality. Others shared historical references, reminding audiences of previous royal controversies and fines imposed on past members of the monarchy. Personal stories began to intermingle with the narrative. Ordinary citizens shared experiences of tax struggles, juxtaposing their own financial hardships against the enormous obligations of the Sussexes, creating a powerful emotional resonance. The media storm also generated its own internal tensions. Editors and producers competed to secure the most sensational angles, often emphasizing conflict and drama over nuance. Television reports included dramatic reenactments, visual graphics illustrating the sum of $500,000, and split-screen comparisons between public reaction and palace commentary. Social media platforms amplified these dramatizations, ensuring that every moment of tension, from speculative legal moves to rumored statements from palace insiders, was immediately consumed, shared, and dissected. The narrative became self-perpetuating. Coverage fed social reaction, which in turn fed coverage, creating a near-constant cycle of emotional engagement and public debate. For Harry and Meghan, the media storm was not abstract. It was a tangible, relentless pressure that shaped their daily lives.